$200, a Super Nintendo setup costs twice as much as the old system. For the money, the company promises better pictures, sound, and adventure. Now you're playing with power, superpower. You're the king, I tell you! The king!
Only for Super NES. Only on Super NES. You're listening to the SNES broadcast with your host, Soul Blazer.
Hello, welcome to the Super NES podcast. This is episode number 168. These are your two regular co-hosts with you today. I am Greg, and joined as always by Joe.
Hello.
And many thanks for being here again, folks. We appreciate it. We are once again delving into that deep, dark, slippery world that is the Super NES RPGs, which are many of them on the system. So, because of course it's the system's bread and butter for many years. So,
ain't that the truth?
Yeah, this was Joe's pick this time around, and Joe picked a game I actually had never gotten around to playing myself. So, one of the best things about this podcast, for sure. So, which game did you want to go down the rabbit hole of today, Joe?
All right, so I chose Lufia and the Fortress of Doom.
Yes, this is actually a very interesting RPG. So we'll get into it. This game is actually a fairly early Super NES game. It came out in Japan, and it came out in Japan in June of 1993, with a pretty quick turnaround for the U.S. market in December of that year. It never received a European release, which was common for many RPGs of the time period. So, no shock there, unfortunately. The game was developed by a company called Neverland, which apparently, when I could find online, their first game that they made. So this is indeed their first commercially released game. None of that first effort for them. So Neverland was around for many years, from about 1993 until about 2013, before they went bankrupt. Besides the Lufia games, they're also probably most well known for doing the Rune Factory series, which is pretty famous. I've never played any, so I've never played like the Rune Factory games, but I know people who have and like really enjoy them. So most of their games did not come out. Come out in the U.S. except for the Lufia and Rune Factory games. So
I was gonna say, isn't that like a Harvest Moon type game?
Yeah, it's kind of it's a little bit hard to explain, I guess. It's like it's basically Harvest Moon. Oh, here we go. Somebody else described it themselves as saying like Harvest Moon where you wield a sword.
Oh, okay.
So,
there you go.
But that was said by the longtime producer of Harvest Moon himself. So yeah, he would know. But yeah, the Rune Factory series has always done very well. Now that the company's bankrupt, other companies I think are making the games now too. So because unlike Lufia, that's sort of an active franchise.
Yeah.
But, so Lufia was published by several companies over the lifespan. Whoever actually had the rights to it at the time. This game was published by Taito, who was trying to get into the RPG market, just like like Capcom and Konami and other companies, like over the time period too. So the sequel did not get published by them. The sequel got published by Natsume because Taito had already shut down their North American operations by the time the sequel came out. So we've already covered Taito in the past on this podcast. I won't spend too much time on them, except that Taito's probably best known for its franchise of Space Invaders, like an Arkanoid. So Taito's still around today, but Taito doesn't really make too many. But Taito, at least for the North American market, Taito does not make too many games anymore. So they seem content to license out their games to other companies to make, such as well, they're owned by Square Enix. So Square Enix handles much of the publishing of their games these days for consoles, and also Raw Thrills, they license out their games to make like arcade games. But Taito's still like alive and well. So like many others, Also, many Japanese games. This game also was renamed for the North American market. Lufia series in Japan is known as Espadós Denki, which literally translates as Biography of Espadós. So, your typical wordy Japanese title there.
Right.
So, Espadós being the name of the world in which the players play in, which is renamed to Lufia, like for this the North American version of the game. Hence, what's just called Lufia. So, this is also known as Lufia and the Fortress of Doom, as Joe said, aka Lufia 1, to help differentiate between the other games that came later in the series. So pretty typical RPG in many aspects. In some aspects, it's not a very typical RPG. Joe, before I get into that, sorry, like 1 second. Well, let me ask here because let me ask here before this relate. Is there a reason you wanted to pick this game? Is there a reason that you wanted to look at it?
Okay, so there's multiple reasons. One, this is one of those games that like I would find in ROM packs, and I would occasionally pop it up. I'd play it for like say 15-20 minutes, kind of get my fill, and then like kind of just leave it. Like I'd never go back to it, and I did that numerous times throughout the years. One thing you need to know about me is that I was not an RPG guy back when this game was released. So I grew up with the NES, and I had played a little bit of Final Fantasy, but it was like the same game save. I didn't know how to save or anything else, so it was always booting up in this one game save right by just outside the castle. I would kill some goblins. Occasionally I would have that weird horse pop up and kick me in the face and kill me, and I would just continue to, reboot that one game save over and over again, just playing it. And for me, it was just like, oh, cool, I can go kill some goblins, and then eventually I end up dead because I wandered off to some place I wasn't supposed to. Never understood the game. Until I was in high school when Final Fantasy VII came out. And, it sounds kind of cliche, but it's true. Like, Final Fantasy VII was my introduction to RPGs. It was the first one that was really released in a wide scale in which I was aware of it. I had just recently had a PlayStation, and that was my first experience. So that was the bar that was set. And then, eventually I played Breath of Fire 3. That was the next one that I got into, and then Lunar. So like I expanded my RPG knowledge and experience, but I never really went backwards. It was always just going forward. And recently I've been trying to go back and play those older RPGs, and this is one of those, like, I encountered it once before, and I wanted that experience, in full. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's almost like that what if, you know what I mean? Like, what if I had actually just, played through it and had that opportunity? So, and it's nice, and like, and I caveat, this whole review on the fact that, this is, unfortunately, like, this is where I'm at with my RPG experience, and, this way, our listeners know that, if I seem a little harsh, it is because of the angle in which I'm coming at this thing.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, I don't have that traditional RPG background, so.
Well, a lot of people have the same kind of experience background that you do. I mean, Final Fantasy VII was people's first RPG from, across the board. It seems like.
Yeah.
So a lot of people jumped into the franchise and into that with that game. Me, I always have been a big JRPG fan. As a matter of fact, I'm playing Dragon Quest XI like right now, as well. So like it's interesting. It's interesting to me to compare and contrast a more modern JRPG to like one of these older ones from the 90s.
Right.
So, but yeah, the Lufia series is just something. The Lufia series is a series it's one of the series I was meant to get around to, but to get around to like I never did for one reason or another.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, so yeah, so. The game was Super NES only. However, a Genesis version of the game was planned, and this is actually pretty interesting. So, because Taito made games for the Genesis as well too, and they wanted to try to increase the market. So, like they licensed out to make for the North American market only Genesis version, Genesis port of the game. It was literally going to be a port. It was just the plan was just simply port the game over to the Genesis, be done with it.
Right.
So, and this game would have this game would have been fine on Genesis. I mean, there's nothing really like preventing it from being able to be play well on that system or whatnot. So, originally planned for 1994 release, that got pushed back spring 1995. There were advertisements taken out like in magazines. However, eventually, even though they promised the game would come out, spoiler, it never did. Taito closed their North American operation in 1995, and that was pretty much it.
Yeah.
So, out of the blue in 2014, a guy who claimed to be one of the licensed, one of the higher programmers to work at the Genesis port, suddenly appeared online saying, hey, I've got a prototype like of this game. Is there any actual value to this? And of course, people lost their collective minds over it because a lost prototype shows up and people are like, oh my god.
Right.
So, reading his posts, it's pretty interesting. He says the reason that the game, he says the main reason the game never came out from his perspective was that they wanted to complete the entire game, the printing process in 6 months. So, he said basically the original Super NES code was, I'm not going to use the words he used to describe the code. He said basically it's a mess.
Yeah.
And Japanese programmers, the game were of no help. So, typical complaints of this time period. You still hear some of that today, but especially true back then. It's because, so those were all reasons that kind of hurt the development process. And then obviously when it fell behind schedule, Taito was like, well, we really don't care about this anymore.
Right.
So he estimates the game to get the game as only being 10% complete. So programming this did not get very far. The ROM was eventually leaked online, so you can look at it if you want to see how far along it got. Not very far, but it is kind of a shame that this ever came out because we'll touch upon this a little later on. But I think if the game came to Genesis, it would have done pretty well. So, So as I mentioned before, this is a franchise. So, before we touch briefly on the games, Joe, do you want to talk about the game in broad strokes, just kind of plot, setting, characters, that kind of stuff?
You got your 4 characters, your party. I can't remember the main dude's name. It's bothering me right now. But there's Lufia. Basically, you have your character that you control. He's not a silent protagonist either, which I like.
Right.
He actually has quite a bit of dialogue with the NPCs and whatnot. Then you have Lufia, who's the girl. She's kind of a healer. That's basically her role in the party. Then there's an elf character. I should have written down who the characters were.
Adjourn.
Yeah, there's the little elf character, and then there was one other that I cannot. That's a guru. He's like a strong guy, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So,
a guru. So.
And he has no magic abilities, but he is strong,
Yes.
which is really nice. But also one of the things that I kind of knocked this game for. So we'll get to that when we get to gameplay.
Right.
But this is your typical RPG fare. You know what I mean? You're trying to save the world. You got help along the way, but it's I don't know. I felt this game kind of dragged a little bit and it was very monotonous just because like you have someone, like, this is the best way to explain it. Your hero needs to be needs to get to a difficult dungeon or cave, so he needs help. So then he goes to like a town and he finds help, but said character is not going to help unless you collect so and so, and so then you go collect so and so, but the last thing that you have to collect, the king has, and the king won't give it to you unless you go to a cave or a tower or whatever and collect something for him to give you the last piece. And it's just, I felt like there was a lot of padding here.
Yeah.
It's good, and you know what I mean? Like, it's fun, but this is like one of those things, like this particular thing where it was like, oh, you need to go find this to be able to access this, to find this, to access this, to even get back to what is the original storyline and beat path. This I felt was like old RPG mechanics.
To be fair,
right. This is like this.
To be fair, a lot of games did that. Like this, it's like this time period.
Right.
So, I mean,
so like this was like one of those things where I was just like, like this just felt like padding. You know what I mean? And this is why I caveated this whole thing with the explanation of where I started with RPGs, because this is the prime example. Like, there was some of that in Final Fantasy VII, but it was never to this point.
Yeah.
And I mean, the Dragon Quest games nowadays even do this. And those are great games, but there's even times there where, like, I'm just like, okay, those are optional quests. I'm just going to keep going,
It's kind of part and parcel of RPGs. You really can't like get around
right.
it. So, no, yeah, I think it was like fair, fair observations. So, what's interesting? So, yeah, as Joe mentioned, the story for this is pretty typical. So, the game opens up, like 100 years in the past. There was like there's a group of like evildoers known as the Sinistals, who are this like floating island, the Fortress of Doom. So, these 4 great warriors go on the island, defeat them. 2 of them sacrifice their lives. The other 2 come back and have kids, and you're playing as a kid, like one of those, one of those people. So the world's been the world's been at peace for a long time. So nobody actually believes like monsters show up. So that's that's the whole thing. So so I actually like the opening of this game very much, because the game actually gives you a taste of how the game plays.
Right.
You start off with the with that older party on the island,
yes.
going through going through the final dungeon, and it's like and it's a very nice tutorial kind of like mission of the game. It kind of gets you used to the game, get you have to play to it, like, okay, there's no pressure because your characters are super powered at this point at that point. So it's a nice way to start the game. Some other games have done this before in the past, but not many.
Yeah.
So so enjoy this game opening up this way, because it kind of gives you like a very nice taste how the game plays and whatnot.
Yeah, it definitely didn't hold back. Like, I definitely felt like it gave you the kick in the teeth right away. So it's like the encounter rate, which I know is, very much, what old RPGs were, but the encounter rate was ridiculous, in my opinion. I felt like it was like every 5 or 10 steps, like you were in a battle.
You're not alone. Like, it is a high encounter rate.
Yeah.
So, like, we'll get into that. But, and then, like, also interesting, when they made the sequel to this game, Lufia 2, Lufia 2 Rise of the Sinistals, that's actually a prequel to this game.
Yeah.
It's like, they decided that, hey, like, why don't like the opening scene was so fun, why don't we make the whole game like this?
Right.
This is, again, not the only game to have done this, but not many games have elected to make the follow-up be a prequel as opposed to a sequel.
Right.
So, Lufia 2 Rise of the Sinistals, which we'll cover at some point in this podcast, as well. Also, because we've already looked at the first game, might as well plug this one too. So, focuses upon the events, so the events that upon that original war. So, so 3 other Lufia games came out in North America. The actual proper sequel to this game, Lufia and the Fortress of Doom, was Lufia: The Legend Returns, which came out for the Game Boy Color of all systems in 2001. So that's the actual Lufia 3. That's the actual like fall in the events of the events of this game. So so I missed this game when it came out, even though I had a Game Boy Color. I'm curious now to go back and look at it. So
I'm in the same boat.
They also released a Lufia: The Ruins of Lore for the GBA in 2002, which is a Gaiden game. So there was also a cell phone game in Japan only. And then apparently Lufia was thought well enough of that the last Lufia game, 2010, was a remake of this game called Lufia Curse Sinistrals, for the DS, which I'm very curious to play now because they changed quite a bit, like that remake of the game.
Oh, okay.
One thing that game is more of an action RPG because combat's now you pick it. You see the enemies as opposed to like random battles. So the game was also redone like in a 3D graphical style.
Okay.
And they also added in a grid system, a system to allow you to be able to increase your stats, like level up. So so quite a few changes to the game. Both Neverland and Square Enix developed the game together, since like Taito was owned by Square Enix at that time, and Asumi published it. So, so some of the complaints I may have with this game, Joe, I think would be addressed like in that remake.
Yeah.
So, especially especially the high flank counter.
Right.
So, but anyway, so unfortunately that's it. No Lufia games come out until 2010. It's probably a dead franchise. Having said that, I never know because Square Enix seems to be content to focus on the Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest series,
right,
like the RPGs these days. But who knows? So, but yeah, it's been a long time since the Lufia game came out. But for the remake, there is a canonical game for the hero. I can't remember his name right now because we should name him. In this game, you name him as whatever you want to. But Lufia's name was renamed as Tia, like the remake.
Oh, okay.
So probably to separate the confusion between her and the world name.
Right.
Because, yeah. So, but this game's also curious in the sense that you may remember, Joe, we talked about the Lunar games several years ago, and the Lufia games are a lot like the Lunar games in the sense that everybody remembers the first game. The first game's the one that got out of the release. The release got attention. That's a game that's remade. That's a game that's been re-released again over the years. Whereas the sequel, the second game, never got as much attention. Never got a remake flavor release.
Yeah.
So like Lunar, the Lufia 1 and 2 are the same way, which is unfortunate because I think Lufia 2, from a little played of it, it's a better game.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, that's what I've heard. So.
But not that Lufia is a bad game. I just think Lufia 2 is it's more like a polished effort.
Yeah.
So. Actually, I'm sorry, I take it back. I think that it looks like Lufia was released only in Japan, like on the virtual console. It never got.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because I was gonna say I know Lufia 2 got remade. I think it was DS, I think.
No, I think it was the first game. This game I was just talking about.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Curse of the. Yeah, Oh no, I'm sorry.
Curse of the Sentinels is a remake of the second game.
The second game, yep, you're right. Sorry, I had it backwards.
You're good.
Lufia 2 and 1 play very similarly anyway. So
yeah.
The main differences are just the graphics. The graphics touched up, and they touched up, and the story's different. So, yeah, So not quite. So yeah, my bad. Not quite as much of a similarity as Lunar because Lunar 1's the game that's been remade all the time, but still, there are some, there are some comparisons.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, so having said all that, like I said, Yeah, so like Joe said, the game is very typical RPG-ish in the '90s. 2D graphics. It has a very like Final Fantasy slash Dragon Quest Dragon Quest look to it. Let's get into the pros and cons of the game. I think. So Joe already mentioned some of them. So I think, Joe, we may disagree upon the graphics. I think these graphics are actually pretty good, like the time period. The sprites, the sprites are small, but they're detailed and well colored.
I agree. So I actually have noted that they're bright and colorful. I said the art is nice and serviceable, but it's standard fare for the SNES. Mm-hmm. I don't think it tried to do anything spectacular or anything like that.
True.
And from the little bit that I have played of Breath of Fire, I feel like Breath of Fire, which was released soon after this, just a little bit better looking. Not by much, but there's just a little bit. And also the one thing with my playthrough of this game, a lot of the assets get reused. And it was something that I noticed, almost every town, there's at least one or two buildings, even some of the NPCs, they all look the same. So it can kind of disorient you as far as where you are in the game. Sorry. Very annoying cat this morning. But yeah, so we're actually, pretty much on the same page as far as the graphics go. I actually thoroughly enjoyed the graphics.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I mean, no, they're not. No, they're not the best graphics in the system. Like Final Fantasy's Dragon Quest games, definitely better graphics than this. But considering this was a new company, the new company, their first RPG effort, I do give them some slack. But because they probably didn't have they didn't have the resources that Square Enix or Squaresoft at the time period actually had to give to their developers. So it's right. I think the game. There's a lot of graphical reuse, but the sprites could be a little bit bigger, but the art itself is pretty good. The color palette is pretty pleasing for the most part. The monsters look pretty good. There are.
Those are some really nice sprite work with the monsters.
Yes,
for sure.
Yeah. So, again, reusing of assets, but not to the point of it being super egregious.
So one of the things that kind of caught my eye. So of course, while you were giving the backstory of the game and whatever else, I was flipping through Nintendo Power and Game Pro for reviews of this game, and I noticed that Secret of Mana came out alongside this game. So yes. I can totally see how this got under the radar, even at the time. You know what I mean? Even at the time, Secret of Mana. That's a pretty high bar there.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, Game Pro, both these games are nominated for Game Pro's 1993 Role Playing Game of the Year award, and Secret of Mana beat out Lufia for it.
Yeah.
So
rightfully so.
But yeah, so we'll get into it, in a little bit. But the game seems like it's sold fairly well. It's hard. A lot of these games are hard to be able to say, how well they sold because we don't have as much sale data for games back then as we do now.
Right.
Games released now. So, but under the radar for sure. So, the music of this game was pretty good. Typical RPG stuff. There's some very some good beats. Some pieces stick around with you for a little while. Not an amazing soundtrack, but very good typical JRPG soundtrack stuff.
Yep, and I agree with you. On my notes, I put the music is good, but like the assets, it is used over and over again, and unfortunately, there's probably a good 6 or 7 pieces of music that they have, but if you play this for any amount of time, longer than 15 minutes, you're going to hear all those pieces and also hear all those pieces repeated. So there is that. Like, I feel like, that, not that it felt rushed, but I feel like, they felt like they needed their main pieces for, like, stories and towns and whatever else, and then they were just kind of like, okay, well, we got this far, let's just go with it.
Right. Yep, for sure. So, all right. So, I'm gonna move on to a section that I've heard, the section that I've very originally called, the three greatest and the three greatest and the three weakest parts of Lufia, which kind of, so in other words, what separates this game from other JRPGs like this time period. So, let's get it. So let's get into strengths. First of all, I already mentioned one of them. I think the prequel, the opening of the game is very strong. I've already talked about that. I like games that give you a kind of tutorial like this. It's different. It's interesting. It's a different way to open up the game. You'd be like, okay, 100 years in the past. Here's the great battle that you're instead of now. So, that's a plus to me. I really like that. Second, the writing. I was very pleasantly surprised. I'm used to games this time period having horrible translations because Final Fantasy IV, enough said.
Right.
So, and other games this time period also were like, this one this game not only dialogue well written, it's also as far as I can tell perfectly translated. I was very surprised by how good the writing is.
Yeah, I agree.
So that's a plus. I like for sure. So, the third strength to strip the game, I would say, is that, as long as you fight as you need to, which we'll get to the counter right here in a moment, but as long as you fight what you need to, and look at a walkthrough now and then if you have to, this game to me at least, and I'll be curious to hear your thoughts about this, Joe. It's not overly difficult. It's not the most difficult RPG on the system. It's not easy, but on a scale of 1 to 10, at the one tail, I think the actual difficulty of this game is probably like a 4. I mean, as long as you keep up your encounters, it's not super taxing. The boss fights are pretty good as long as you fight bravely. The game does a good job of trying not to throw enemies at you above your level unless you screw up and go in the wrong area. That's not supposed to, which the red sign, like, you're not supposed to be here, get out of here. So, the actual flow of the game worked pretty well, I thought. Compared to some other games, which are agonizingly difficult. I thought this game was a pretty decent challenge for a more newbie newbie JRPG player of the time period. So,
yeah, I actually thought, as far as combat goes, in progression, I felt it was okay. One of my biggest gripes was I don't know, sometimes it just felt super random, and this has one of those old RPG, specifically JRPG, traits where when something dies, your character will say have an attack left and they swing at the air instead of hitting another monster, and it's infuriating in the original Final Fantasy when that happens, because that's one of the first RPGs, so they're still working out the kinks. But here in 1993, I would have been going crazy, because this should not be in an RPG, and I don't think any other RPG on the Super NES, at least the ones I've encountered, are like this. They don't have that. They have the norm, quote unquote, the norm, where when you go and attack and you kill an enemy, the next attack, even if it was focused on that enemy, will move to the next living target. And I felt that was kind of infuriating, especially since you can't attack single monsters. You attack the group, and then the computer decides who you're actually going to attack. So it's out of your hands.
I was actually going to mention that next to one of the game's weak points. I absolutely agree with you. I believe the Seventh Saga also has a have to target a living enemy for it to connect thing. It's been a while since I played Seventh Saga.
Well, that game came out like earlier in '93, so that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
But you're right. For a game this time period to still have that system, it was infuriating Final Fantasy. It's infuriating here. So I mean, it's not a deal breaker. But you do but it is frustrating. You have to fight very carefully to try to balance out your attacks and whatnot because combine the randomness of the attacks anyway for how much hit points the enemy has, how much damage you do, etc.
Right.
It's frustrating. Yeah. So I don't know why the developers kept that old system in this game, but it's frustrating. Yeah. So we've also already touched already talked about the encounter rate. The encounter rate of this game is very high. So probably one of the highest games I can remember playing with an encounter rate. Yeah. It's bad. So I mean, on the plus side, you want you doing a grind,
right?
But unless you have, I think they're called smoke orbs, Unless you have escape items, escaping battle can be very difficult. Yep. So, so it's a very high encounter rate. So as you gotta be patient with that. Money's also hard to come by too, as well. Enemies don't drop you like a lot of money. So you want to always This game takes page of Dragon Quest. We have Dragon Quest. I want to search everything. Search cupboards, search drawers, search dressers, because you find stuff all over the place. And some of the stuff you can sell for some pretty good money to help compensate for that. So, third big point is that again, this is typical of JRPGs of this time period, but the amount of how do I want to phrase this? Instruction the game gives you. From what you need to do next and how to get there. I understand games this time period definitely did not do as much as they do now. But compared to some games again like Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest, I hate to keep comparing Lufia to those series because it's not really totally fair to it. But those are the gold standards as far as JRPGs on the system goes. The game can be kind of confusing as where you need to go next or how to get there. So, I definitely had to work. I definitely had to look at a guide now and then to figure out where to go next. So, again, not the end of the world, but unless you want to spend a lot of time just roaming around getting lost,
right?
There will be times. Because also the triggering system in this game is a little bit strange. Like very early on in the game, you have to go to a castle, enter the castle to trigger an event. Then you have to go past an area you've already gone through once to find a guy there who was not there previously and talk to him to advance the plot and whatnot. It's like ugh. So. Again, typical JRPG fare of the time period, but I think Lufia is a little bit weak in that area. So,
agreed.
So having said all that, I probably like the game a bit more than Joe did. I think this is a very decent JRPG for the time period, and I probably will go ahead and finish it. Because I think that the story and characters are all very typical fare of this time period. But the dialogue surprised me with how written it is. The dialogue surprised me with how well written it is, enjoyable it is. The gameplay is fun enough to keep me coming back for more. So I probably will go back. I probably will go ahead and finish this up at some point. Do I regret having missed this back in the day? Yes. I kind of wish. I think my impression of this game would be be more favorable then if it was than it was now. If I played it back when it came out. But as Joe mentioned, a lot of games came on the system around this time period. So I think I'm not sure how well Lufia sold. Yeah. But the game probably got the game probably did get ignored a little bit. I think it's a very typical JRPG of the time period. I guess that's what Dragons. So, for good and for bad.
Yeah, and it looks like at the time, this was probably a budget title as far as RPGs are concerned, because I'm looking at like the Nintendo Power and like games around that time. You're looking at, you know, your typical $60 game, $50 to $60, but Secret of Mana was $73 at you know, retail. So you figure, you know, you have Secret of Mana, and we can talk and praise Secret of Mana for what it is, but you know, Lufia technically is, you know, a budget title compared to that. So, you know, like you said earlier, it's not fair to compare the two, you know, but they were released in the same month, so there's that.
Right.
So
Yep, that's true. So, but so anyway, I definitely enjoyed going back to this game. You know, it's like I said, it's a decent game. And also, one of the reasons I also wanted to mention the Planet Genesis port earlier on, besides the fact it's very interesting, of course, the fact that it's so difficult in Super NES for an RPG, because the bar for RPGs is set so high.
Right.
Because this system has so many great classics. You have the games like Final Fantasy IV, Final Fantasy VI, Chrono Trigger, Secret of Mana, Super Mario RPG. There's so many good RPGs on the system that Lufia kind of gets like lost in the shuffle. And like, you know, what would be a great game on another system like Genesis is just kind of like a mini game on the Super NES because of that. So, not the game's fault, just the fact that it's just the fact, like I said, the bar set so high. There's so many like, you know, great games that the system like out already. So, but yeah, so that's what I said. I think if this game would come out on the Genesis, it would, it'd be more fondly remembered in that system than it was here on the Super NES.
yeah, I can see myself probably picking this up if it had come out for the Genesis. I think, you know, between the Game Pro review and you know, which I was big into at the time, Game Pro was always in my hand. I probably would have absolutely at least thought about it. You know what I mean? It would have definitely been a decision that I would have had to make. But
because the competition in Genesis was not quite as high. I mean, yes, you do have the Amazing Fantasy Star series, but beyond that, there really were not too many good JRPGs on Genesis.
You're absolutely right.
But
which goes back to why my exposure to RPGs was so late. I backed the wrong system.
Well, Fantasy Star 4 is an amazing game. Like, you know, I really think it's the that game's better than some Super NES games. I think, you know, that really is like a very, very good game.
Yeah, that's, you know, to be honest, I've never played any of that series, and I really need to. So.
Yeah, I think that. I think in your case, the fourth game is probably the best one. The fourth is probably the best one to go into, because like the second one's very, very grindy, and the third one, while it does some very like cool time hopping generational stuff, is not the it's not quite as strong gameplay as number 4 is. But anyway, so there are a couple. So there are a couple of secrets and cheats with this game. This game, like some other games, also includes a I don't want to call it a new game plus, but there are definitely but there is like a new game mode that unlocks when you beat the game the first time around. Which still being done today. I mean, Final Fantasy VII Remake does this well too. So. This is a tried true way to get somebody to come back to play a game again, which usually would have limited value by adding a new game mode. Luffy's new game mode is called Try Again mode. So, once you beat the game the first time, this unlocks and you play the game again in Try Again mode. The difference, you receive extra experience and gold from your enemies to help make the process easier. How much? 4 times. Wow. You had the experience the 4 times the gold. So, yeah. So the speed run of this game online on YouTube, which I highly recommend checking out. The guy speed runs the game in 4 hours, whereas a normal playthrough of this game takes about like 30 hours or so. one of the reasons he's able to speedrun the game is because he's playing it in try again mode, because because obviously it helps, but I mean it's not cheating per se, because because it is a perfectly valid game mode to play in, but yeah, it definitely helps. So there's also a glitch with the end in this game. The same kind of glitch that some other JRPGs also have. If you go to the end, try to stay, and it's safe tonight, and you don't have enough money, the game will still, the game will still let you stay there for free. So,
well, ain't that generous of them.
yeah, just to bug the good.
Yeah.
I mean, some of the games, did that too. So, like bug testing these games could not have been fun.
Yeah.
So, I definitely give them some credit for that. So, so we've already talked about reviews a little bit this game, and this is also very, and so this is also a very interesting case where the case where opinions of the game have changed a lot between back then and now. So, because the game is over 25 years old now at this point. So, when the game came out, the game got very high reviews. Like a lot of people, a lot of people consider it to be one of the best RPGs of the system so far. 9 and 3. This was early on. Right. So, so most reviews of the game were very, very positive. EGM gave it 7.8 out of 10. Game players gave it 9 out of 10. Game Pro, as you already mentioned, gave it like 4 out of 5, like out of 5. Nintendo Power gave it Nintendo Power gave it 3.5 out of 5. Electronic Games gave it 93%. Like very, very high marks. So, I don't know how well the game sold, but the game definitely reviewed very well. So
yeah, I like this little snippet from Game Pro, and it's the very end of the article in which they write up their review for this. Yeah. And he says, "Longing for Lufia, out of the many RPGs that will crowd the stores this holiday season, Lufia is the one that stands out apart from the pack. Don't wait for the Final Fantasy when you can have the immediate satisfaction of this great cart. Intermediate RPGers and experts alike will find something to enjoy in this cart. Hail Lufia, long may you loof." And I can understand, you know what I mean? Like, if you're having to wait for the next Final Fantasy and you didn't have much other choice, and you didn't know in advance about Secret of Mana and what great game that was going to become, then this was a pretty solid RPG to pick up.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and there are some differences. And to be fair, there are some differences between this game, like Secret of Mana, Secret of Mana, for example, being like real-time combat as opposed to like the turn-based system.
Right, and Secret of Mana is a big question mark for me, because for me that's like Zelda, and I guess that's an RPG, but I've never seen Zelda as an RPG. So
no, Zelda to me has always been like an action adventure game. I think. Nowadays it's called an adventure. Nowadays it's called an action RPG, which I can agree with. But but to me it's always been like an action adventure game. So,
and to be fair, the new Zelda games are more RPG than what they were. So
true, exactly, yeah. So at the time, the time the game came out, I definitely kind of agree with favorable reviews. So nowadays the game. Nowadays the game's seen with more like a critical eye. So the reviews are all over the place now with this game. Now this game, if you look at if you look at more like modern reviews of this game, they give anywhere from like mixed to positive still. So some of the retrospectives comment on the story of characters, which was I said before, the story of characters was very good for the time period. I mean, the writing surprised me with how good it is. The story is typical fare, but It's very well presented. The characters at least have some like emotion to them, which is better than I can say for like some other games. So I definitely can understand that. So story and characters, I think the game was kind of ahead of the curve some with that. However, others criticize it like being inferior to all the other Super NES games. So Super NES games that came out later on. So which I've already talked about. Not exactly a fair comparison. Like I said, this is a very high bar set to. But yeah, Lufia 2 is still seen as a better game these days. So. But anyway, so yeah, I guess how you look upon it. So I guess how you look at it today depends upon like nostalgia you have for the game, your tolerance for JRPGs at this time period, your perspective upon things, etc. So, but I can see like both points of it. So. Before we move on to eBay pricing, Joe, any final thoughts, as far as the game? Like, will you go back to finish this game?
I will probably end up going back to finish this game. I said, obviously there are some things that, I'm not a huge fan of, especially the high encounter rate. But also, I mean, let's face it, like, I'm going to run it on an emulator. I could put in, a Game Shark code or, Game Genie code, and make it so that there are less encounters and whatever, so make it a little more tolerable. So I mean, there's multiple ways to be able to play the game. There's no reason for me not to go back and finish this. Like I said, if you're a fan of Lufia or like the series, or if you are a fan of old school RPGs, I actually highly recommend this. If you are a newbie to RPGs, which I still consider myself a newbie, then I would tread lightly. That's about the best I could put it.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, the game, like I said before, the game's not overly difficult. I mean, a newbie player can do pretty well with this. But like I said, but yeah, like Joe said, it's not the best game in the system. So, unless there's a reason you really want to play this game, you may be better, you better advise going somewhere else. But but if you're like a big fan of JRPGs and miss this game for like whatever reason, by all means, go back and play it. So, so we will cover the sequel, Lufia 2, at some point here in the future. So, which is very similar, based upon the quick playing of that one I did. The game is very similar to this. The game is very similar, like this first game. So, like it had some Zelda, Zelda aspects to it. We can we can use tools and weapons in dungeons. There's side quests. There's like casino games to play, that kind of stuff. So, all right. So pricing. So we mentioned game. Games sold decently. RPGs tend to hold their value very well. Pricing this game's all over the board, but not bad pricing as far as an RPG goes. As long as you're interested as long as you're content with the cart by itself. So, it's CIB copies that get pricey. So, these prices include shipping. At the time I researched, 11 copies of the game were listed on eBay. 49 copies recently sold, so not a problem buying it. If you want card only, and I said before, these prices these prices do swing wildly. Copies sold anywhere from $21 to $108.
Yeah.
So, just a matter of like being patient, and not engaging in bid war and just snagging a copy of the game for the price you want. But like $20. But yeah, $21 is like definitely worth it. So,
yeah.
CIB copies though, that gets expensive. Those depending on quality and completeness factors, IE even includes the 10 power inserts or inserts in in the in the little cardboard block things that they had. The
And
boxes
the map.
had. Oh yeah,
Yeah.
there was a map to this
Yep.
game too, wasn't there? Yep, that would help. CIV copies of the game sold anywhere from $180 to $250.
Yeah.
So definitely definitely a much more pricier game for collectors.
I just want to point out that in May 22nd of this year, one sold for $15. With the shipping, it's like $20.
Yeah.
Then there's a couple that I saw. One sold 2 days ago for $18, and the other one sold for $20.85, like a week before. But those last two were shipped from China, so I'm almost 100% sure those are repros.
That's curious because, I did not see any evidence of any repros of this
Yeah.
game. Which, I mean, possibly, but there's no point in making repros if you can't make money off it. This game's not in super high demand.
I mean,
so,
I'm very suspect of anything coming from China.
yeah, I suppose so. But there were also sellers who were selling Lufia 1 and 2 together as part of a bundle, for like $100 or whatnot.
Oh yeah, that's a good deal.
Yeah. So, so snag those if you want to
Yeah.
as well, just to get the both games. But yeah, so I'm definitely curious. Definitely curious to check out the other Lufia games because the Game Boy Color and the Game Boy Advance emulate very well. The DS2 actually, the DS emulates pretty well. Split screen is always kind of an issue to deal with, but for the most part, it emulates pretty well. So I'm gonna check out those other games because I'm sure the DS game's super expensive these days. Not to me, does not make very big print runs. So probably good luck getting that game physical copy for cheap. But I'll have to check them out for sure. So, but anyway. So thank you everybody for listening to the podcast as always. It's always fun to talk about an RPG like this. So, Joe, I'm glad you didn't hate the game. So at least you got a chance to, at least you got a chance to scratch the 25-year-old.
Yeah.
So if you have any questions, comments, feedback, suggestions, you can always leave them on our Facebook page, or you can also send me an email directly to the SNESpodcast@yahoo.com. Joe, how can
You can find me on Twitter at JOESUX30, and also I have a very open Facebook, so you can always just find me there.
Yes. Always full of interesting finds, the finds and whatnot. So
I'm a thrift hunter. What can I say?
So next in the podcast, with the change of plans, we've just started. We've just started schedule a little bit. We usually would not cover RPGs back to back because we're human. We only have so much time in the day. But this episode coming up, and this guest host coming up is something I've been wanting to do for a long time now. So that person has been very very busy with their lives until recently. So please forgive us for having RPGs back to back. We'll try not to do it again, but like I said, we have this opening open up, and we want to definitely take advantage of it. So next episode. Oh, let me start off by saying first, to fix the minor boo boo with the release schedule. This episode alone will be coming out 1 week as opposed to 2 weeks. So this episode will drop for this episode will drop for everybody on July 30th as opposed to August 6th to get and then after that point we'll go back to release every 2 weeks. So that will allow us to fix a release error that cropped up during the guest host we had in the episode the podcast recently. So as far as speaking about guest hosts, however. We're very pleased to announce the next wave of guest hosts coming up. But we have not 1, not 2, but 5 episodes coming up for you with 5 guest hosts. So, if you like guest hosts, then you're in for a treat. And
We got some good games lined up as well.
Yeah, we do. Yep. Include some games I never heard of. So, and the exception of our next guest host, they're all people who've been on the podcast. The podcast should have before in the past, but But our next guest host is going to be a fellow podcaster and a personal friend of mine, Jala, from the Flagging Level podcast, and also some other stuff that she does. I podcasted with Jala before in the past. I played in Power with George. Joe
I was gonna say I also was there.
Yep. Like for Lunar 1, not for Lunar 2, but for Lunar 1 he joined us. So Jawa did not have Jawa came into the Super NES kind of late, which he's going to talk about like in depth, so I'm not going to spoil cast here. But one of our favorite games of all time is the classic game Chrono Trigger on Super NES. So long-time listeners of the podcast, and they realize we've already we've already covered the game. So like I said, we'll give a brief explanation here. For one, it's been a long time. It's been almost 6 years since we've covered the game on the podcast. So I obviously am still here, but my co-host at the time, who covered the game with me, is no longer on the podcast. So we're gonna get two fresh perspectives on the game, because Joe has never played the game until recently. He's playing through it like right now, aren't you?
Yeah.
Aren't you, Joe?
Yes, I am.
You are, right? Yes. So Joe has a lot of nostalgia for this game. I am kind of middle of the road. I did not play Chrono Trigger until emulation around like the late 90s. So we're gonna have some very interesting perspectives to bring the game, I think, which is one reason I decided to go ahead and revisit it. So second, also we're gonna focus more upon the gameplay and our memories and what makes the game so good, and also talk a little bit about the franchise as well. So we'll try not to cover too much stuff we've already covered the first episode on that game way back when. But I try not to. I try not to revisit games too often. But I think in this case, for those reasons, there's enough going on here to warrant going back to look at the game again. So I do encourage everybody to check it out for sure. Joe is a great person to talk to, and it should be like an amazing episode.
Should be fun.
So, also advance warning. We are going to also revisit the Star Wars games at some point too, because Joe is a huge Star Wars fan, so it almost seems fair to go back and talk about them again. So, fair warning as far as that goes. So, but anyway, join us again in 2 weeks. If you like that episode, as always, we appreciate your support very much. Stay safe, everybody. Take care, and talk to you again soon.
Bye. May the Force be with you.
Nintendo controls 80% of the video market. But no matter how you play the game, or which game you play, things definitely have come a long way since Pac-Man.
Now you're playing with power. Super power.